Most people think wealth announces itself. They think it arrives with a dramatic sound. A new car door closing in a nicer neighborhood, a vacation photo. Everyone is meant to notice. A watch too expensive for the wrist that carries it. A kitchen large enough to make the owner feel temporarily taller. A title on a business card that suggests the person finally crossed some invisible line. That is what poor people often think wealth looks like. Real wealth is usually much quieter than that. In fact, many people who are genuinely moving toward financial freedom do not feel rich at all. They feel ordinary. Sometimes they even feel behind. They are too busy building to admire the scaffolding, too busy saving, investing, refusing foolish upgrades, and making the next sensible decision to notice that the whole structure is becoming stronger under their feet. I have watched this my entire life. A great many people who look rich are financially weak. A great many people who look modest are becoming very strong. The public usually cannot tell the difference because the public has been trained to read the wrong signals. It reads spending as proof, it reads borrowing as confidence, it reads visible comfort as victory, it reads silence as smallness. That is why so many households end up chasing appearances while real wealth slips by in a quieter lane. If you want to understand what getting rich actually feels like, you have to learn to ignore the theater and study the internal shifts. Instead, wealth begins changing your behavior before it changes your image. In many cases, your life starts becoming stronger years before it starts looking impressive to people who are using the wrong scorecard. That is what I want to explain. Because the most important signs that you are getting rich are not the glamorous signs. They are the subtle ones, the ones that change your decisions, your breathing, your calendar, your sense of urgency, and the way money occupies your mind. If those signs are appearing even quietly, then the machine may already be working. The first sign is that you have learned to live below your means without making yourself miserable. This sounds simple, but it is one of the rarest financial accomplishments in the world. Anyone can spend less for a month out of guilt. Anyone can announce a temporary austerity plan after a credit card bill produces enough shame. What I am talking about is much more valuable than a temporary burst of self-denial. I mean that you have built a life whose natural cost is lower than your earning power, and you have done it in a way that does not make you feel punished. That is different. A lot of people imagine living below your means requires clipping every coupon, saying no to every dinner, never traveling, and carrying around the emotional posture of someone permanently under attack. No wonder they reject it. They are not rejecting wisdom. They are rejecting a caricature. Living below your means in a durable way usually feels calmer than that. It means you stop needing to impress people. It means enough stop being an embarrassment. It means you no longer interpret every raise as permission to enlarge the machine. It means you ask a different question before spending. Not can I technically afford this? But what does this do to my future margin? Margin is one of the most important words in finance, and one of the least appreciated. Margin is the gap between what comes in and what must go out. Margin is the difference between a life that can absorb shocks and a life that becomes dramatic every time the world behaves like the world. A person earning $75,000 and spending $55,000 has something precious. Not because the number itself is enormous, because the gap is alive. The gap can save, the gap can invest, the gap can say no, the gap can wait. The gap can turn a raise into assets instead of into new obligations. A person earning the same $75,000 and spending $80,000 may look more successful to the outside world. The apartment is nicer, the car is newer, the purchases are louder, the life is socially legible, but the structure is weak. Every month is already claimed. Every surprise becomes personal. Every setback has an audience in the nervous system. I have no interest in outward success purchased with inward fragility. If you are getting richer quietly, one of the earliest signs is not that you spend beautifully. It is that spending has become intentional. You know what enough means. You do not need to perform abundance to prove you are doing well. That alone places you ahead of a shocking number of people who earn more than enough and still never build strength. The second sign is that you have begun thinking in long periods instead of short emotional bursts. This is where so many people lose, because the modern world trains the eye toward immediate payoff, immediate likes, immediate delivery, immediate entertainment, immediate validation, immediate market reaction. Wealth does not obey the emotional timetable of a smartphone. A person quietly getting rich starts making decisions with a 10-year mind instead of a 10-day mind. That change is enormous. The average person remains obsessed with quick wins. The next bonus, the next tax refund, the next hot stock, the next side hustle, the next account screenshot, the next dramatic move that will finally make him feel as though he is catching up. I have never trusted quick financial thrills. They usually leave a bruise later. Real wealth is built through a much less flattering process. Repetition, boring repetition, automatic contributions, broad ownership, delayed satisfaction, capital left alone long enough to begin behaving like labor that no longer needs your body to keep clocking in. Most people understand this intellectually and still fail emotionally. That is because the early years of real investing feel almost insulting. You contribute $500 a month, the market falls, you keep contributing, it recovers. The account still does not look like a miracle. The mind begins negotiating against the plan. Maybe there is a faster way. Maybe I should be more aggressive. Maybe this is too slow for someone who started late. That is how ordinary people sabotage compounding, not through ignorance alone, but through impatience with the early chapter. If you have shifted into a longer game, you no longer ask whether this month felt satisfying. You ask whether the system is still functioning. Are the contributions happening? Are the costs low? Is the ownership base growing? Are you still buying productive assets? Are you still letting time accumulate force on your behalf? That mindset is one of the clearest signs of quiet wealth. It means you are no longer using money only to produce emotional spikes. You are using it to produce a future. The third sign is that you have built a financial buffer, and more importantly, you no longer think of that buffer as idle. This is one of the biggest psychological upgrades a household can make. People talk about emergency funds as though they are boring little savings buckets for cautious people who have no imagination. I think that is backward. An emergency fund is purchased sanity. A household without one is usually running around life half naked without knowing it. I do not say that to be cruel. I say it because I have seen what happens when ordinary life meets a structurally weak household. The transmission fails, the roof leaks, the job becomes uncertain. A child needs something unexpectedly expensive. The body presents a bill. Suddenly the family is not making financial decisions. It is making emergency decisions. And emergency decisions are among the most expensive in the world. A person with a true buffer behaves differently when the laptop dies. He replaces it without turning the week into a courtroom drama. When layoffs are announced, he is concerned but not spiritually flattened. When the car needs repair, he does not immediately begin composing a tragedy about the injustice of the bill. He still dislikes the expense. Of course he does. But dislike is different from danger. That difference matters enormously. Most people do not understand how much mental bandwidth gets released. Once a household has 3 to 6 months of real expenses, set aside, the mind stops doing so much emergency arithmetic. It stops scanning every incoming text for financial threat. It stops treating the next bill like an exam it forgot to study for. What enters in place of that low-grade constant financial fear is breathing room. Breathing room is one of the first real luxuries money buys. Not a better sofa. Not a cleaner countertop. The ability to think beyond Friday. A financial buffer does not usually make you feel rich in the glamorous sense. It makes you feel unstartled. That is a much better condition. If you have reached the point where ordinary disruptions no longer produce crisis behavior, you are wealthier than you may realize. The fourth sign is that your income has started rising and your lifestyle has not kept pace with it. This is one of my favorite signs because it reveals a very important internal change. The person has stopped viewing raises as emotional permission slips. Most people experience income growth the way a floodplain experiences rain. It gets absorbed immediately into new lifestyle terrain, a bigger apartment, a newer finance car, better restaurants, more subscriptions, more delivery, better vacations, better image. The invisible maintenance cost of the new identity rises with the paycheck until the person discovers that the raise created almost no new future at all. This is why so many high-income people remain financially brittle. Their lifestyle knows how to eat. A person quietly getting rich develops what I would call resistance to lifestyle inflation, not because he has no taste, not because he enjoys deprivation, because he understands that each major upgrade is not merely a present purchase. It is usually a claim on future labor. A bigger apartment is not just more square footage. It is more rent every month and often more furniture, more utility cost, more expectation, more attachment to a standard of living that becomes emotionally expensive to reverse. A newer finance car is not just a smoother ride. It is a future transfer of capital away from productive assets and into depreciation. The quiet, wealthy person begins seeing these trade-offs more clearly. He gets a raise and his first thought is not, what can I buy? Now his first thought is, how much more can I capture? That is one of the most powerful shifts in all of personal finance. A person whose income rises from $60,000 to $80,000, but whose core life remains close to what it was before, can create a tremendous engine of wealth if the extra money is directed into ownership rather than theater. The beautiful part is that from the outside, such a person may still look almost unchanged. That is why the world misses what is happening. It sees no obvious visual transformation. It assumes no dramatic financial progress is being made. Meanwhile, the portfolio thickens, the buffer deepens, the future widens, and the person becomes harder to scare. That is real progress. The fifth sign is that you have stopped comparing yourself to other people in ways that change your financial behavior. This is a larger sign than people think. Envy is one of the great destroyers of capital because it can infect even a person who is making all the right moves. He is saving. He is investing. He is reducing foolish costs. He is building a position. Then he looks sideways. A friend buys a truck too expensive to justify. A neighbor renovates the kitchen beyond reason. A cousin goes to Greece, then Italy, then somewhere with better lighting for photos. A coworker casually mentions a club membership, a private school, a luxury condo, a bonus bigger than your annual salary, or a portfolio that somehow always seems to contain whatever happened to triple last month. If your financial standards are still being set by the social perimeter around you, all that effort can be undone surprisingly fast. The quiet, wealthy person becomes much less vulnerable to this. He starts seeing other people as visible consumption for what it often is, not proof of strength, a choice, sometimes a smart one, often a financed one. Frequently a trade-off he has no wish to make. This is one reason I have always liked the old Toyota more than the shiny new truck that appears mostly designed to convince the driver of himself. A cheaper, reliable, unglamorous tool paired with a growing portfolio is often the more intelligent form of status. Though the world does not recognize it as such, once comparison loses its power, your spending becomes more aligned with your own goals instead of with someone else. As theater, that is enormously valuable. You stop buying to feel current. You stop upgrading to avoid embarrassment. You stop treating every visible purchase around you like a challenge to your own adequacy. There are very few more profitable psychological upgrades than that. The sixth sign is that money has stopped being the loudest thing in the room. This one is subtle, but once it happens, the change is unmistakable. When a person is financially weak, money colonizes the mind, not because he is shallow, but because weakness forces attention. The bills are near, the margin is low, the account must be watched, the anxiety is repetitive, decisions that should be small become debates, lunch, gas, the timing of a utility payment. Whether one more purchase this week would be irresponsible. It is exhausting. Then something changes, not because the person becomes wildly rich, but because the systems become stronger. Savings are automated, investing happens regularly. Bills are covered without drama, the emergency reserve exists. The basic machine does not need so much emotional supervision. Now, money recedes not because it stopped mattering, but because it no longer has to be the main character in every hour of thought. This is one of the great hidden gifts of a stronger financial life. It gives mental bandwidth back. A person can now ask better questions. What work matters? What kind of family atmosphere am I creating? How do I want to spend time? What project deserves energy? What legacy am I actually building? The person with weak money systems may still ask those questions occasionally, but they keep getting interrupted by immediate arithmetic. The quiet, wealthy person begins living in a different mental climate. Money is still being managed, but it is no longer devouring so much mental space. That is a major sign of progress. Real wealth is often boring precisely because it has been systematized. The seventh sign is that you feel increasingly rich in time, not only in dollars. This is one of the deepest signs and also one of the least visible to the outside world. Most people say they want money. What they often actually want is more control over their time. They want more mornings that are not panicked, more evenings that are not spent recovering from the last forced commitment, more white space, more ability to say no, more ability to rest without guilt, more room to think, more room to choose. The poor mind thinks money buys things. The maturing mind discovers that the highest use of money is often to buy back hours and attention. This does not require billionaire wealth. It begins much earlier. A person quietly getting rich starts valuing convenience, sanity, and time leverage more intelligently. He may pay for help cleaning, not because he is lazy, but because 3 hours with his family or his craft or his thoughts are worth more to him than the small monthly savings of doing everything himself. He may say no to meetings that serve no real purpose. He may stop wearing busyness as a medal. He may stop confusing a packed calendar with a meaningful life. This is an extraordinary sign because it means money is beginning to serve its highest purpose, not merely expanding visible consumption, but reducing compulsion. A person who feels richer in time is often far wealthier than the person with the larger paycheck and no white space at all. Time wealth is one of the quietest forms of real wealth. No one sees it in a photograph, but the person living inside it feels the difference every morning. The eighth sign is that you have stopped making excuses and started taking ownership of your financial reality. This may be the most decisive sign of all because without it, many of the others never become stable. When people are weak with money, they often speak about money in a passive voice. Rent is too high here. The economy is unfair. My student loans ruined me. I deserve to enjoy life. My income is the real issue. My upbringing is the problem. Some of these complaints may contain real truth. I am not blind to structural difficulty. Life is not equally easy. Costs are real. Starting points differ. Injustice exists. But ownership asks a different question given the reality. What can I control? That question changes everything. The quiet wealthy person does not always have ideal conditions. Often he does not, but he begins optimizing within reality instead of waiting for reality to become flattering. He gets a roommate if housing is too high. He bikes or drives something modest if transportation is eating the future. He meal preps if that gives him room elsewhere. He says that is not a priority for me right now, instead of saying I cannot afford that as though life itself were imposing every trade-off. That shift in language matters because language reveals where control is perceived to live. The person who owns the plan is much harder to derail, and ownership is cumulative. It improves savings, it improves investing, it reduces status spending, it makes emergencies less chaotic because the person is already in the habit of asking, what can I do next instead of who can I blame? That is a rich mindset long before it produces a rich balance sheet. Now, I want to say something important because people often misread discussions like this and think the point is to become joyless, suspicious of pleasure, unimpressed by beauty, and emotionally unavailable to the good things money can buy. That is not my argument. I have no admiration for sterile wealth. Wealth is not there to make life gray. Wealth is there to make life freer, calmer, and more aligned with what you actually value. The problem is that many people try to purchase the feeling of wealth before they build the substance of it. They buy the image first and postpone the structure. That is how they get trapped. The person quietly getting rich often looks almost ordinary in the middle chapter because he is still building the substance. He has not yet converted his options into theater. He may never fully do so. That is fine. The world does not need more theater. It needs more sturdy households. So if you see even one or two of these signs in yourself, I would take them seriously. If your spending is becoming more intentional, if your thinking is stretching out over years and decades, if your buffer is real, if raises are turning into assets rather than faster lifestyle, if comparison has started losing its power, if money has become more of a background system than a daily source of mental conflict, if time is beginning to feel like something you can own more of, if your language is shifting from excuse to ownership, then you are not merely surviving, you are changing your structure. And structure is what gets rich, not hype, not social media, not one lucky stock tip. Not the visible symbols everyone has been trained to chase, quiet structure. That is what the world misses. The richest people are often not the ones who feel rich in the emotional jackpot sense. They often feel disciplined, restrained, slightly underpraised, maybe even a little behind compared with the theater around them. Good, that often means the money is still being put to work. And that is exactly how it should be. You do the work first, you save, you invest, you refuse foolish upgrades, you build room, you stop needing witnesses for every decision. Then years later, the money begins showing up in ways the crowd still does not fully understand. A stronger mind, a calmer household, a thicker portfolio, a life with more space, a future that no longer feels like a threat, that is wealth. And by the time it becomes obvious to other people, you may already be too busy living inside it to care very much. Whether they notice